Everyone, and welcome to the Winnetka Village Council study session for December 8th, 2020. I'd like to call the meeting to order, ask everybody to either mute or turn off your other electronic devices. And if you could also remember to mute your microphone when you're not speaking, it may improve the sound quality of the meeting. Even though it's a study session, Rob still needs to take a attendance check.
Thank you. Trustee Coladarchi? Present. Trustee Kripe?
Here.
Trustee Swerk?
Here.
Trustee Dearborn?
Here.
Trustee Apatow?
Here.
Trustee Lampier?
Yes.
President Rentz?
Yes. Okay. Item 2 is public comment. Kristen, do we have any public comment of people who wish to speak to us tonight on an item that is not on tonight's agenda?
Yes, President Rentz, we do. We first have a public comment from Liz Kunkel, not related to an agenda item. It's regarding the Village Council 2021 budget message. Thank you to the village for all its work on the 2021 budget and everything else you're doing to keep us safe and moving forward. Regarding business district revitalization, I hope the council and relevant commissions will continue to revisit the 2018 streetscape and signage master plan to ensure it is up to date in terms of sustainability related and other technologies and strategies. Regarding infrastructure, I respectfully request that the term / phrase trees, tree canopy, or something similar as appropriate be included as one of the elements of our village's infrastructure that requires regular preservation and improvement. Thank you again, Liz. President Rentz, we also have attendees in the audience that I will need to recognize to see if they have comments on an item not on the agenda.
Okay.
The first attendee is Chuck Dowding. Chuck, I'm going to allow you to talk and unmute your microphone.
I have no comment not related to the agenda.
Would you like to speak during an agenda item, Chuck?
I can't say that right now.
Okay, we'll recognize you again. I was trying to be efficient. We'll recognize you again when we get to that point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Craig Whitty. Craig, I'm allowing you to talk and asking you to unmute.
Thank you, Kristen. I'm really just here to listen.
Thank
so I
you.
don't have any other comments at this point.
Thank you. Next is Scarlett Harper. Scarlett, I am allowing you to talk and asking you to unmute.
Hi, I'm also pretty much here to listen. Thanks.
Thank you, Scarlett. Next is Terry Cross. Terry, I am asking you to unmute.
Yes, I did. Thank you. I have no comments. Thank you.
Thank you. And that concludes the audience members, President Rentz.
Great, thank you. Okay, then we'll move forward with item number 3, Parkway Planting Permit Review. This summer, a village resident installed a raised planter garden in the public parkway without a permit. During the resolution of this issue, it became apparent that additional clarity and guidance are needed for parkway plantings. Public Works Director Steve Saunders will begin with a review of the parkway planting permit process and suggested modifications to the village code. Steve, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you and good evening. I put together a brief slide deck to kind of walk through the issue. As you're aware, we had over the summer, Kristen, if you can move to the first slide, Over the summer, a resident in the village installed a planter area, a raised planter area on village property between the sidewalk and the curb. There's a photograph shown here. Well, I think we've achieved an appropriate resolution to this particular issue, and I think Trustee Kreip can speak to that when the presentation is finished. It did bring up some potential opportunities to clarify the current code language, and then also just to clarify kind of our policy on what we permit on parkways. So there's a couple of sections of the village code that are applicable. There's one section that prohibits encroachment of structures into public rights of way. And then there's a section of the village code that requires permission for planting in the parkway. Next slide. So the language for planting in the parkway, I think, is pretty clear. It just spells out that people can't plant in the parkway or remove trees or things like that without permission from the village. But there's this language on encroachments that frankly reads as if it hasn't been changed in many decades, and that's probably the case. Talks about cellars and vault doors and things that just, I don't know the last building built in town that had a cellar or a vault door or a coal chute or anything like that. So there's an opportunity here to clean up this language. In your packet, we have some proposed language on page 4 in markup form and page 5 in clean form. But basically it cleans up the description of what a structure is, makes it clear that the village code in other places uses the term street and right-of-way interchangeably. And then on the off chance that there's some sort of cellar or vault door that's lawfully in existence, in 1932, we left that language in there. But the idea, frankly, is to just clarify the intent of the ordinance, which is that they're really, the village did not want non-village structures constructed out on public rights of way. And there's a lot of reasons relating to that in terms of potential liability and maintenance confusion and obstructions that can prevent the village or other private utility companies from installing utilities in places where they can go by right and things like that. So a minor cleanup is proposed to this section. And then if that's something that the council is in favor of, then we can have an MC ordinance drafted and bring that back in the future. But there's also an opportunity to clarify some of the guidance. Frankly, the village code gives the public works director a fair amount of discretion in terms of reviewing and either approving or denying planting permits on the public parkway. And I think that's appropriate, and I'll explain why. But there's an opportunity to kind of clarify our application forms and some of the attachments to give better guidance up front as far as helping people understand what might be appropriate in certain conditions and what opportunities there are. So what I want to do over the next few slides is just explain some of the varied conditions that are present in the village parkways and how we've generally applied discretion in the past, just to get a sense that we're doing that appropriately. So if you can move forward one slide. So these are two types of plantings that are fairly common in situations where It's a residential roadway, and where there's a sidewalk. And so the Parkway area is basically the strip of grass between the sidewalk and the roadway. So the one on the left, we have this type of situation throughout the village where people have planted some sort of ground cover, hostas or other low growing type things around Parkway trees, or sometimes adjacent to their driveways or near their service walks that go between the sidewalk and the street. Just an attempt to beautify the Parkway. To be completely frank with you, a number of these probably are not even permitted. It's something that, the homeowner goes out to Home Depot and buys a couple of flats of hostas and puts them in on a Saturday, and nobody ever notices. Nobody ever applies for a permit. Nobody from the village ever even notices that something has happened. And so there's dozens to 100 or so homes that probably have similar Parkway conditions to this, as illustrated by the picture on the left. The picture on the right is actually a permitted installation. This is a small rain garden that was put in on a village parkway. You can't see entirely clearly from the photograph, but the grade has been slightly depressed to hold stormwater. This is out towards the west end of one of the tree streets. And so there's a small stormwater function associated with this. As well as beautifying the Parkway. Those are all water-loving native plants that are in that rain garden area. It's a particularly difficult time of year to make any landscaping look attractive. So this installation is actually much more attractive in the spring, summer, and fall. But that's a small rain garden that went through the permit process and was put in earlier this year. Next slide. So these are two photographs of conditions, again, residential streets, but where there's no sidewalk to kind of delineate exactly where the property line is. So if you look at the photograph on the left, you'll see that there's a fence in the photograph. That fence is actually on the right-of-way line. So the space between the fence and the curb is village property, where typically a sidewalk would go. And you see that this particular homeowner has a carriage walk that goes out adjacent to the curb, and they put in some low-growing plants. I think those are shrub roses that are in that particular location. And this was a permitted installation. It seems to be in keeping with kind of the openness of the parkway, but also in keeping with the adjacent landscaping. Doesn't provide any significant obstruction to the overhead utilities. You can see that wouldn't be a location where if somebody came in and wanted to put in some private trees or something like that, the overhead utilities would lead us not to approve that type of installation. But a low-growing shrub that was appropriate for that location, we permitted it. The picture on the right, we didn't find any record of a permit for that planting. That's some low ground cover, almost an identical condition. Something that we would likely approve for that location, even though it's planted out on the public right of way. Next slide, please. So this is, oops, back one. This one's a little bit more, little bit more complicated situations. So the picture on the left, again, no sidewalk. But a little more intense planting. This is one that we did not find a permit for. Those are some evergreens that are placed outside of a fence as screening. The trees were planted by the village. Those are village parkway trees. This is the type of thing that if somebody came in for a permit, we would probably want some type of landscaping that's maybe a little bit more controlled. But again, something that we would probably approve. It's just landscaping. There's no structure. The photograph on the right, that's actually Hayward Road looking south. The property line is well behind where the edge of the cultivated bed is. So those ornamental trees, and this was a permitted installation, those were privately planted, as were the screening arborvitaes just right by the property line. They're between the sidewalk and the property line, but still out on village property. And that's one that we felt was in keeping with wanting to screen the residents from Hayward Road. It doesn't obstruct with the sidewalk. And so we permitted that installation. Next slide, one more situation. These are a little more complex. These are two that there was a significant amount of back and forth between these homeowners and the village. They were ultimately permitted. The one on the left, an individual actually originally came in wanting to put in a raised garden at that location. We denied the permit request, went back and forth, and these are perhaps slightly taller plantings than would be ideal, but they're completely in keeping with the naturalized landscaping of the neighboring property. They don't provide a sight distance obstruction. They're columnar. They don't obstruct the sidewalk passage. So we permitted that installation. The one on the right is along Hayward Road. The homeowner originally had planted a number of upright ornamental trees directly underneath all the utility wires. We were back and forth for several weeks over that. We had denied that permit application, and they eventually relented and came back with a lower growing, more naturalized landscaping plan, which we permitted through our process. My point in bringing all of these out is really twofold. One is that we work very hard to try to accommodate homeowners where we can, because they're taking an effort to try to beautify the village generally. They're taking an effort to try to beautify their properties. And we try to work with adjacent residents to allow them to do that in ways that don't either provide significant obstructions of the village's ability to maintain its infrastructure or extend its infrastructure, or cause issues with sight lines or other types of problems. And so if we could move to the next slide, with trying to I guess continue the same degree of flexibility and willingness to work with property owners, but still protect village rights and make sure that we can maintain infrastructure and don't have liability issues. We would want to clarify a little bit of the permitting process to provide better guidance up front, including a list of preferred tree and plant species that would be provided with the application, along with a list of prohibited invasive species that we don't really want planted. One of the things that will be an opportunity going forward as we get into the construction of some of the larger stormwater improvements in Western Winnetka. Green technologies are a big part of that ongoing plan for both runoff reduction, but also stormwater quality management. So we think that guidance could be provided in certain locations where rain gardens and bioswales might be beneficial to construct on village parkways. And this is an opportunity for perhaps the Environmental and Forestry Commission to do some research in providing some recommendations and guidelines for appropriate small rain gardens and bioswales at a parkway scale where it can be fit with utilities and existing trees and the like. We would make clear in our process that no structures are to be put out on the right of way, including boulders, fences, planters, street lights, things like that. That the parkways are for village type utility structures only. We provide some guidance in terms of height and location for sight distance and setbacks from trees, utilities, intersections, driveways, etc. And then some sort of statement or disclaimer that clarifies maintenance responsibilities going forward. The village would like to maintain the parkway trees, including trimming, but that the remainder of the maintenance would be the responsibility of the homeowner. Next slide. So our recommendation is we're seeking concurrence from the council to modify that section on encroachments to clarify the application documents as I outlined, and then to include the Village Environmental and Forestry Commission to develop appropriate standards and guidance, not necessarily standards, but guidance for planting of rain gardens and bioswales where appropriate on the village right of way. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Steve, if I could just chime in, Steve and Chris, just briefly to provide just a little bit more background, if that's okay. So thanks for the presentation, Steve. I want to maybe ask a question or two about the recommendations in a minute, but just a little background. First I want to thank our homeowner, who I think is on, and I'll let him identify himself if he wishes to later, for helping to present this issue. What we're doing tonight is not an adjudication of a particular homeowner site, but we're talking about what policy makes sense for the village going forward. And Steve, I think you did a great job of doing that. And, I think, rather than viewing this as like an opportunity for us to exercise regulatory oversight, this really is an opportunity for us to advance our goals with respect to the stormwater best management practices and updating the code. A couple things, there's two provisions of the code that are in the materials, and Steve, that you touched on. The 120440, which deals with encroachments. That's pretty straightforward in terms of updating it to get rid of the references to close shoots and everything. I think the real money for us in terms of how we can make a lasting positive contribution to homeowners that want to do something environmentally responsible, something attractive, something maybe a little bit more creative than just Kentucky bluegrass, is going to be that 1228.010. And Steve, I know you're recommending making no changes to it, but what I would suggest is that that is when we consider, after the EFC provides a little bit more insight, there might be an opportunity to make it less of just it's unlawful to do the following things, and it may present an opportunity to give some positive guidance to people that do wish to go through the application process, as far as what it is that other than bluegrass that they could consider planting. And I'm going to paraphrase a little bit from the discussions I've had with our neighbor on this issue, but I think it would be helpful to just articulate, so it's unlawful to do certain things, and you've got that laid out, but the village will exercise discretion as to these other plantings. And in exercising that discretion, I think there's like 5 principles that I just after reviewing it and listening to you, Steve, that I just want to point out, maybe for discussion, but the 5 factors I think that ought to be thought about in approving different plantings. Again, we're not talking about raised beds, we're talking about plantings. Would be interference with utilities or access to utilities. So stuff growing up into the lines or access to the cutoffs. 2, and this is a big one unique to the Midwest, but interference with snow removal or snow banking. Some of the examples you showed, and this sort of sparked my, when there's no sidewalk, I'm less worried about plantings that are 10 feet from the street, because our snow banks don't go that far back. But when we're dealing with the immediate snowbank area, that's something that probably should be considered, and homeowners should just be thinking about that. The third would be interference with visibility for safety for pedestrians and motorists. I think we kind of think about that concept, but I think it would be just helpful to lay that out there. So like some of those prairie grasses, like I have some in front of my house, not on the Parkway, but in front of my house, and they can grow to be, 8 feet tall. And that wouldn't work. But a lot of other prairie grasses work great. 4 would be consistency with neighborhood aesthetics. And that's a real subjective criteria. So I just think just saying it may be enough, but and then 5, kind of a positive factor would be plantings that have positive benefits for the village, including its stormwater plan, and are consistent with the recommendations of the EFC. So I think what I'm thinking is maybe we talk about the structures or encroachments language tonight. That's kind of straightforward. We don't want, things built up there that could be a problem. But the plantings and factor side of it, there might be some benefit to letting the EFC do some review. And then if we could just provide a little bit more positive guidance than just it's unlawful to do these things, I think that'd be good. And then the last point I'll just make, and maybe you can respond to this if I'm missing something, but the first sentence of it is, it's unlawful for any person without written permission from the village to injure, trim, treat, plant, or remove any tree, shrub, vine, or flower. That would probably inhibit most routine maintenance activities. And so I think we might want to clarify just that part to say, except as necessary for routine maintenance or something like that. Anyway, I just wanted to provide a little background to make clear, we're not here to litigate one of our neighbors' garden efforts, and just because I spent quite a bit of time talking with some of our friends and neighbors on this issue.
Thanks, Andy.
Yeah.
Jump in, everybody. Questions for Steve? Penny?
Sorry, I have a couple questions. One is relative to, is one of the points of consideration, particularly in the streets that do not have a sidewalk, in terms of door clearance for parked cars and safe passenger egress. And similarly, safe pedestrian passage if necessary. And this we can talk about after the Q&A, but I have, the good and bad thing about COVID is we've spent a lot more time walking around the village, right? And I'm wondering, I would like to talk about how we can ensure that there are safe places for people to walk, even on streets that don't have sidewalks. Another consideration, Stephen, I don't know if it's part of what you guys look at when you approve installations, is if it is a street without a parkway, without a sidewalks, do you consider where a sidewalk might go and ask that, consider not approving like trees or other major kinds of plantings that would interfere with future building of a sidewalk? So I don't know about that, if that's one of the points of consideration.
Yeah, I guess I can take the second of those questions first, and the answer is with respect to longer lived types of plantings like trees, we do take that into consideration. One of the provisions in the current permit is that the village retains the right, if somebody has permission to plant something in the right of way, the village has the right to basically revoke that permission for village infrastructure or utility projects. We don't give away our rights to put in a new water main or put in a sidewalk or access an existing utility. So I would want to strengthen that language in the permit. But given the timing uncertainty, with things like hostas or ground cover or things like that, we kind of, we may say, hey, at some point a sidewalk might go in here in the future, but that doesn't seem like a significant reason to prevent that type of planting. But with respect to trees or things like that, we would take that into account.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really important that people are clear that, I mean, it may be that, there needs to be a sidewalk built and stuff is going to be taken out. Because, I do recall that in past conversations about sidewalks, homeowners get very upset because they've spent a lot of money landscaping and then they felt like, it wasn't fair. So I think it's important that we be very clear about that. And what about watering systems in terms of how would that fit into this ordinance or language?
That requires a separate permit because it's an attachment. So there's a lawn sprinkler permit.
Right.
There are some locations with lawn sprinklers out on the Parkway, but it's very clear and they have to sign a statement that basically says we can remove it for really any public purpose. And so, we run into those when we do sidewalk replacement or curb replacement as it is. And people, the way that we handle those with infrastructure type projects where we can, if it's not an emergency repair, we work with the homeowner beforehand, say, here's how much of the Parkway we're going to tear up. You got to pull your sprinkler heads back and get them out of the way. When you're done, you can come back and put them in, that type of thing. But if homeowners do want to put in sprinkler systems, we do have a process to allow that.
Okay, great. I just want to I know that you do it, but I just want to make sure that, we have it properly fit in. The last question, which is a bit of a backwards question, but where does the language come in or the homeowner direction about pruning back trees on private property that affect sidewalks, the hangover sidewalks, again, walking around a lot, trees are growing over, gosh, even more than half the sidewalks. So I know it's a homeowner's responsibility, but where is that language? Where is that responsibility stipulated?
There is a village code section. I don't have chapter and verse off the top of my head, but it basically prohibits maintaining or planting any shrub or bush or plant or anything like that either overhangs a sidewalk or blocks passage or blocks visibility at intersections or blocks visibility to traffic control signs, things like that. So there's village code language that's specific to that. Typically in a non-COVID year, we would have enough manpower that we actually in the spring visit pretty much all of the intersections and sidewalks and send out notices in the spring to property owners that have allowed bushes and things like that to grow over the sidewalks. That was one of the casualties this year. We just didn't have the on-site manpower during the spring and summer when everything was shut down to stay on top of that. So that's something that we would wind up hitting pretty early in the year next year.
I don't know, and Ben, this is a question for you. Looking at how our ordinance are laid out, it is, if I was trying to find where language was about that, I would think I would go to sidewalks and public streets. I don't know if we need a cross-reference or anything, or when we go about having this direction about parkway plantings and so forth, that language, that point be included as well, because I think it's really important, and if we can cross-reference that in any way, I think it would be really helpful. Thanks. Okay, those are my questions for right now.
Rob, I saw that you had your hand up.
Yeah, I think some of the first of all, I think I'm glad we're doing this because I thought it was clear, but still people feel they can just negotiate things in public and social media, and I don't think that's a good thing. So the clearer we can be, the better. I agree with Andy's points about clarification. We want people to beautify, but obviously we have to. People always push the envelope, so I think it's good to be as clear as we can in this, and I think this gets a long way to going and doing that. So I'm glad we're doing this, and I hope that it will prevent us from any other future issues that we've had to deal with over the last couple months.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, great presentation, Steve. I'm really glad to see that there's been many examples of people obtaining permits for the work in the right of way. That's great to see, and I'm glad you pointed that out. One example I think of where a future sidewalk was planned that came, I think, before our council was Locust, south of Hill. Wasn't there some homeowners that wanted to put a sidewalk along Locust, and
Right,
they all can't agree? And I think one person's like, well, geez, I put all this landscaping in.
right, right,
But
right.
that might be a county right of way. Is that correct,
It is.
Steve?
It is a county right
So
of
this
way.
does not apply to the county right of way.
No.
No, actually, I was actually referring to a conversation that was, maybe 10, 15 years ago, when there was, it was a long stretch. It was close to Skokie School. In fact, in Chris's
So there's
Street.
a good example of, but that's a good example of
Yeah,
future planning of a sidewalk
right,
and this permit process would be nice, because if that was village,
right,
we would have hopefully not had the plants there or put the sidewalk where it belongs and the landscaping goes away.
right.
So that's interesting. I agree with you. That was going along with you, Penny, on your sidewalk features. I don't see anywhere in the language that prevents anyone from building a berm in a right of way. Maybe that's just inherent that it wouldn't be approved.
Question.
I'm not sure if that's got to be specifically noted. It's one thing to have a bioswale, but we don't want the opposite of a berm.
That's a
is
good
my
point.
guess. All right. And in the plantings, nothing specifically says anything. We talk about the hostas and small stuff, but do we need to literally say no vegetable gardens? So just so someone doesn't plant vegetables just at grade level, even thinking that, hey, it's no different than a hosta, or it's no different than a rose bush. I'm not sure if we want to
Do we care if
be
you
that
can eat-
specific.
I mean, you can eat dandelions.
Well, right. I'm just wondering if that's something we want to be specific of, so we don't have, then you have, let's say tomatoes, they're going to hit the tomato sticks and all that. I'm not sure how that's.
I think we
moved
can
out
find a
in this-
way.
in this
I
process.
think we can find a way to deal with that in the list of desired and undesired species. I don't know that that has to be specified in the actual code language.
Okay, good.
One of the points that I was trying to make in showing all the different parkway configurations is that there's, I think, an appropriate balance between what gets strictly written into the code and where the future public works directors would want to have some discretion, where something might make sense in one place, and then because of either utilities or width of the street or amount of traffic or something, that same kind of thing might not make sense in another context. And I think
Right,
you
okay.
provide flexibility to allow that.
And I know a lot of your examples were street right of ways, but obviously that same right of way issue could occur in an alley, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Good. All right. And then in the, I know there's language about we've got the right to go in there and do any maintenance work required for overhead lines or underground sewer or water. I think it should be clear though that the replacement cost of any owner installation of stuff in the right of way, if the village has to tear it out because of some repairs, the cost to put it back in, if he wants it back in, is at the owner's cost and process, not the village. Basically, we would go back, put it grass back in. Maybe that's inherent somewhere in there, but just want to make sure
Well,
that's clear.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay, that was it. Thanks, everybody.
Bob?
Well, I guess I'll jump in here. First off, Steve, thanks for that presentation. I mean, I get the sense by, one of my questions was how many permits are issued, how's this process work? And it sounds like it works fairly well. There's flexibility. Some residents don't go for a permit and just do it, but sounds like many do. that they're, the public works director is, has discretion on what makes sense. I think probably addresses some of Andy's points, in terms of what would be appropriate, what wouldn't be appropriate. I'm really encouraged to have the EFC involved in this. I think that is a great idea where rain gardens or bioswales would be appropriate. I mean, they may not be appropriate in certain areas, others, and people will know how to do it. There will be some education involved, and I think that's terrific. But it seems to me that, 1204, that seems pretty straightforward. I mean, the language, I think we're probably all in agreement. We don't want structures going up. And it doesn't seem like there's much of a problem here from what I can tell. From what you're saying, Steve, it seems to work. I think that was kind of the underlying thrust of your presentation, is that, yeah, it can be cleaned up a little bit, but it's working. And as long as residents adhere to it, I really don't like the idea, this disclaimer at the end about maintenance responsibility. I mean, obviously it belongs to the homeowner, but, just as an example, say old Dearborn puts his planting out on his parkway, and then I just decide to spend 8 weeks up in Wisconsin during the drought, now my neighbor, I don't want to do anything here that puts the village in a difficult position of having to adjudicate neighborly disputes. It should be clear what can be done. And, from there, hopefully we can enhance it through the EFC, but it just seems like there's not that much of a problem here unless I'm missing something.
No, there's maybe every other year or something like these, one of these will blow up because of a particularly strong desire of somebody to have a particular type of planting installation. We're almost always able to, with a little bit of back and forth, get to an appropriate resolution. I don't think any of these have kind of bubbled up to the council level that I can recall. And the only reason we got to this one was because of the level of publicity that it had generated, and the fact that we were kind of near a citation adjudication process, and we try like heck to avoid those kinds of things.
Right.
And I think with a little clarification and better communication up front of our process and what we want and what we don't want, I think we can continue to do that and have the parkways really reflect what the community generally wants. We're not always going to be perfect with it, but I think it's achievable.
Good. Agreed.
Jack, what are you thinking?
Well, there were two things I thought of. The first thing is do you need to clarify section 040 to make it clear that water pipes and electrical lines can't impinge? The reason I'm saying is I know that there's the sprinkler ordinance that prevents people from putting underground sprinklers there, but should this section refer to that just to pick up? I mean, people aren't going to do much, but because I think Steve, our structures, what is that? Would that include, in your thought, electrical lines? Like if somebody's running a low voltage electrical line under the sidewalk to a light that they've put up in their parkway tree. People are starting to put a lot of lights way up in trees, and I'm not sure if they run wires way up high. My eyes aren't good enough to see that. So, so that was the one thought is does that need clarity? And then in terms of raised planter areas, is there any, I've seen people put, when they put the hosta in around a tree in the parkway, they'll mound up a lot of tan bark, or they may put a little plastic ring around it that's, about that tall. So those are small, and I wouldn't think the village would be bothered by that. is there any need to define or to clarify that the raised planter area we're concerned with are not de minimis, something of 4 or 5 inches and under, and not of a solid structure? I mean, I suppose I would think differently if someone went and got some 4x4s from Home Depot, which are 4 inches tall, and put it around a tree, creating a structure in the front yard. That would be below it. But if somebody comes out with black plastic, and I will say I have black plastic around my front tree, which is why I'm thinking of it. But it's holding in, 3 or 4 inches of tan bark to sort of make that front part look cleaner and nicer and make it easier to weed. So I don't know. Is it, do we bother? Is it not a, I guess what I was thinking of is that in this particular case, the situation that brought this up, the neighbor was asking, wanted to see all the permits for all right-of-way structures, all citations. There was a lot of stuff created, and I'm always sort of a less is more if possible guy. So I'm just wondering if there's a way we can make this so we don't get a lot of fighting back and forth. Maybe there won't be any fighting at all.
Yeah, you have actually put your finger directly on the reason why I think it's important that you leave discretion for staff to work with these kinds of things, because there may be a situation where, for example, a 4x4 thing around the tree would be okay, and then another situation where it wouldn't be. And the minute that you try to define everything down too tightly, you sort of get boxed in one way or another. And the fact that, I mean, we're never going to be conflict free. Sometimes people want something and the village has to say no. But I think with discretion and common sense, that resolves 99.9% of the types of things. And every now and then one's gonna bubble up and be problematic. But I don't think that we can anticipate exactly the right code language to deal with really every eventuality on whether somebody's going to determine the structure should be made of wood or plastic, or what about plastic lumber and things like that. So a long way to say that I don't think we need that level of specificity.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Ben.
So from a legal perspective, one thing to remember is that public streets, public sidewalks are just that, they're public. And it's the village's property for the most part, or in the cases of county roads or whatnot, their property. So as a threshold matter, nobody has authority just to, whether it's electrical wires, planting materials, or whatever it may be, any structure, they do not have the authority for the most part to just start planting or improving and putting things there. We always have the authority to take it to say you can't do it. Now that said, I think that one thing that you've hit on in your code is it's about a signpost. It's making clear to residents these are the expectations, so they know the rules of the game and making it clear so there's not confusion. But the other important part, as Steve Saunders has indicated, is it's also about delegating authority, because absent a code provision that says that somebody can apply for a permit approved of by the Director of Public Works or whoever it's going to be in the village, then really the authority is yours. And and I don't know that you want to have to approve every single item where somebody wants to come forward. So all of that said is, from a legal perspective, I think that leaving an open-ended process with where you set the policy, but there's ability on a case-by-case basis makes sense. So you don't end up with it before you. But it does also control for all the different paginations you can come up with, because we do have the inherent authority to tell somebody no. And we also have the inherent authority to change our code. If we think that there's something that ends up there that shouldn't be, you could always put in a new code provision that says you can't have, planters with 2x4s or whatever that's going to come up that you may not have thought of, you can address down the road.
Gotcha. I'd like to hear what our guests have to say about this. Kristen, you want to go ahead and poll the attendees to see if anybody's interested in sharing their thoughts?
Yes, President Rentz. So first I am going to recognize Chuck.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Let's see here. Can you hear me? Thank you
Yes.
very much for all the intensive discussion. I can see the challenges for this and what should and shouldn't be done. And the Environmental Commission is happy to look at this whole issue of what constitute an appropriate planting and perhaps the issue of average elevation along the Parkway. I think those are issues that probably are still open after the discussion this evening. I can see that it's a complicated issue, but I think we made a lot of progress this evening in terms of putting some guardrails on what it is the Environmental Commission will look at, and I appreciate that discussion. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Chuck.
Next, I'll recognize Craig.
Well, I think this sounded like a very reasonable analysis of the issues, but I was particularly taken by Andy's comment about the understanding of what standard maintenance might be, especially with regard to the word trimming. I mean, I've trimmed branches off of Parkway trees. In one case, it was impeding the visualization of the speed limit sign. In another case, the branches were overhanging the sidewalk. I mean, that seemed reasonable to me. I didn't think about contacting the village. And I hope that language could be found that would make that seem fairly clear. Those kinds of things are acceptable when they're done in the public interest anyway.
Thank you, Craig.
That's a good point. Thanks, Craig.
Next, I'll recognize Scarlett.
Hi, yeah, and thank you for the presentation. This was very interesting. And I also really love the idea of like rain gardens being used around the town, like just also as a way to improve water management. Thank you.
Thanks, Scarlett. Good to hear you tonight. Anybody else in the hanging out there, Kristen?
Yes, President Rentz. Next, I'll recognize Terry.
Thank you, everybody. That was, this is a lot of work. I had no idea how much you need to discuss these things. I learned a lot. I don't really have anything besides that, but I will think twice before I go planting something up near the street. That's all I have.
Thanks, Terry.
We do have additional members in the audience that have joined us since the beginning of the meeting. President Rentz, next, Liz Kunkel has joined us. Liz, I am asking you to unmute.
I think I just did. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Sorry I was late. Technical issues. I want to say a few different things. First of all, thank you so much. I 100% appreciate the need to not determine, or significantly, sort of debate issues in the social media sphere. But in this case, I'm really grateful that the issue came up this way, because if it hadn't, I don't know that we'd be here. And I'm really grateful we are. I think it became a timely discussion. And again, an important part of the village stormwater solution, which is what, so by the way, sorry, Liz Kunkel, an environmental and forestry commissioner, but also the founder and president of Go Green Winnetka, a local citizens environmental advocacy and activist group. And our Go Green groups have been advocating for this kind of personal residential solution for ages, that this should be part of the larger solutions we're talking about. Wilmette does a yard tour. Our Go Green Winnetka group does a Yards That Work tour. I've specifically called it that because this is making your space work for you and work for the village. We can use these spaces in ways that are productive and still beautiful and consistent with whatever image we want to project individually and collectively. And so there are a lot of, I think, efforts and interest in these issues. And I mean, there were 200 comments in the Nextdoor conversation about this issue, 200 comments. There's a lot of interest in this. And so again, but I also, again, at base, grateful that this went from, in less than 2 months, this went from social media post to on the village council agenda. And kudos to all of you for doing that. It's huge. It's really cool. So thank you. And I also want to say, I do not know the homeowner who created the garden. I learned about the issue reading the post in Nextdoor and then through the comments after that. And I just want to say, but honestly, and I don't know, I have spoken with him a couple of times, but I don't know all the ins and outs of what process he went through and the conversations he had. But I would like to say in his defense, I don't think this has come up in either the report that Steve Saunders submitted, with all due respect, or in the conversation tonight. I don't know that this homeowner tried to do a total run around any system. He did call, and I believe he thought he had permission, for what it's worth. Again, I don't know any more than that. It just didn't sound like it was a total going to do it without getting any permission at all. That if I'm mistaken in that, then my bad. But my understanding was he did make some attempt to get permission and thought he had what he needed. And so again, at base, we are where we are now, and I appreciate that we got here however we did, and I appreciate that the village, this issue is being considered. I appreciate that there's this expansion of the conversation to how to use the parkways productively. It occurred to me today, I like this idea, obviously, of rain gardens and bioswales, but it occurred to me that we want to, and I know this is an issue for the EFC to potentially work through, assuming it goes that way, that we're not even just talking about rain gardens. This is a bigger conversation about native plants. They might not actually be rain gardens. It's using native plants that will improve our soil throughout Winnetka, whether it's in the Parkway or not, for what it's worth. And I'll make a side comment that I really appreciate I know other residents will appreciate any guidance the village provides in terms of recommended and prohibited species. And again, I appreciate the village's input and vested interest in this in the parkway spaces, but I hope that the guidance will also, it'll be relevant for backyard spaces too, right? There's still native and non-native or invasive species that I think we can encourage everyone to plant, again, recognizing that the village has no say over those private spaces, but the guidance in terms of what's preferred or not preferred is consistent, I would think. And so hopefully we can, again, kind of think of that a little bit more generally, and it's natives in general, not just rain gardens. Some of them may be rain gardens depending on the individual property, but not all of them. Some of them might be more butterfly gardens or something like that. And then real quick, I appreciated Andy's 5 priorities a lot. And in terms of the visibility issue, he mentioned, I think I heard visibility, safety, and motorists. And as a parent of school-aged kids, I want to specifically say bikers, because those intersections, even the little ones, are hard to see already, a lot of them. And I want a lot of prairie grasses in our area. I think it's a nice native thing we should be doing, but we obviously need to be mindful about where they go and what kind of vision, or if it creates any obstacle in any way. So things to be determined, but I appreciate that there's obviously, there will be lines to be drawn, but I think this is a real opportunity for the village to provide some great guidance that people are looking for. So thank you for letting me have a few more than 3 minutes.
Thanks, Liz. Appreciate the comments. Sounds like you guys will be seeing this over at EFC soon. Steve, could you bring back up the 3 directives that you need, or the 3 items that you need policy direction on?
Excuse me, President Rintz, we do have a few more people in the audience that we need to recognize.
Sorry.
Next need
Can
to
they-
recognize.
I have a question. Can they do are they raising their hand functions versus going through this one by one? If they want to comment, that they can raise their hand on the Zoom call?
So it depends on how they're logged in, Trustee Apatow, if you know someone has called in, and it also depends on your comfort level with the Zoom platform, which is why, to make sure that everyone has a chance to be recognized, we poll the audience.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Jeremy Marino is in the audience.
I'm
Jeremy,
here. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, hi. I'm the black sheep. Thank you for taking this on and talking about it. Just to Liz's point, yeah, I this all started when I looked at the Parkway, which is rather large in our village compared to a lot of places, and I was just trying to think, you know, how do I rethink this in terms of a lot of different things, in terms of the stormwater, in terms of beneficial insects, in terms of pollution, in terms of noise pollution, all those kinds of things. And I just kind of landed on, I thought it'd be great to plant a garden, a vegetable garden, have food, talk to my neighbors. And I did call the village, and I was dumb. I did not write down and take down notes about who I had talked to, but I know I talked to them because I got very specific kind of information about how to go about it, but they did not tell me about a permit process. Otherwise I would have done that, because I was building a large structure. So I would have clearly known that people would have, I wasn't trying to sneak it by anybody. So, so anyway, that's how that kind of got going. But just kind of hearing kind of the second half of Mr. Saunders' presentation, you know, the hope was, and maybe we can still get there, is that the village takes this opportunity to see a less as a kind of what do we need to prohibit, to where do we want to guide the neighborhood, the community towards, how can they help us with these big term issues, big idea issues, right? With climate change, environmental, whatever, our, you know, very local issue of stormwater management. How can we do this? And you know, Kentucky bluegrass is not necessarily the best option for that. And sometimes when I'm listening to the discussion, it seems like there's kind of like a settled law of, or understanding of like, well, this is what it should look like, is basically turf. And maybe in a few instances, in a very, very rare kind of setting or two, we could allow a rain garden or something, and it just doesn't feel very innovative. And I would hope and encourage that we'd want to create a structure through the code that is encouraging what we want people to go through, and also enabling the community to be innovative, and to count on them to rethink how this should be moving forward, not just kind of relying on what the standard is, and always just relying on, well, what's going to be the least confrontational, or what's going to provide the least amount of, you know, phone calls. Obviously, you know, we don't want to try to create a situation which is only creating headaches and pain for everybody, but try not to limit it so that, well, they feel that they can only plant bluegrass or maybe a hosta or two. So that's what I would like hope that would come out of this, and maybe with the EFC, that's where like the majority of this comes through. I will say, like, for example, just the the rewriting of Code 040 is basically been made to be more prohibitive by just being as general as possible to clear out all structures. And I would ask Mr. Saunders, and of course you don't have to respond to me, but I'm just throwing this question out in the air, like, why are structures, and I get that you don't want like a shed or whatever, but instead of just being blanket, you even said just a few minutes ago, well, there are some things that would be okay. In Trustee Coladarchi's question about the plastic thing, well, some structures might be okay. Why is the big question? Why are structures less okay than a pavement walkway between the sidewalk and the curb? You know, why is that more or less difficult to access utilities than a brick walkway, or a parking lot or a parking space that's been cut into the parkway and paved over? like why is a structure, and again, if it's a huge structure, I understand that, but can we be, again, not just purely prohibitive, because I get that that's a lot easier on your end as Public Works and for the code, it's a lot cleaner, but again, it kind of really strikes out the innovation part. But again, thank you so much for talking about this, and I look forward to seeing where we move from here.
And if I could just say, thank you, Jeremy. And, you know, we always have good discussions on these issues. And I have never encountered a situation with this council or any of the prior ones that I've served with where anyone is unhappy at having an issue to discuss. Sometimes we may make a comment about, you know, social media or whatever. The reality is we all do this job because we like talking about this stuff, and you help tee up an issue at a good time. And it gets us thinking beyond just what do we say no to, and start thinking about what are the things that we want to say yes to. And this is so timely with our stormwater program. So anyway, thank you, Jeremy.
Kristen, next.
One final member of the audience, Kelly Conway.
Yes, hi, thank you. I'll just keep it brief. I just want to say that I'm also here due to Jeremy's garden and seeing it myself, and then seeing the next door post. At the same time, I happened to be reading a book by Douglas Tallamy called Nature's Best Hope. And it was just a little shocking about how turf lawns do nothing for our environment. And obviously we live in Winnetka, it's beautiful, we're happy to be here. At the same time, there is just a very large percentage of very neatly manicured turf lawns. And it just, I had been thinking at the same time about like, what else could we be doing? And I was actually thinking of doing a rain garden on my property when all this was kind of going on in the next door thread. So I do appreciate just having a conversation and being able to be part of it. And I, like Andy was just saying, I do think it could maybe be taken from, you know, the villages going to allow certain things to the villages in support of this because they see the many benefits to having a system like this. I just think, given obviously we've talked about the stormwater, but keeping our lake water clean is a huge benefit. And then just helping the insect and wildlife population, which doesn't sound like it could affect us on a personal level, but when you start looking at the big picture, we know that insect populations are going down very quickly, and you know, due to a lot of reasons, but the loss of habitat is a big one. So even just a small group of plantings in a few people's yards can really help for a lot of different reasons. Some local different cities that have had programs like this in place with support from their village and getting grants. Village of Elgin actually has a lot of information online, which was interesting to see. Like the village not only allows things, they actually help support it and just give some great guidance. So thank you. I see this going many places and I'm happy to be here for it.
Thanks, Kelly. Appreciate your comments.
So President Rintz, we do have 3 comments that were submitted in advance of the meeting. The first one is from Laura and Sid Glenn. I wanted to let you know that as a 23-year resident of Winnetka, I do not want to see restrictions and guidelines to change for our parkways. I passed the home this summer with the raised beds on the parkway, and I would not want to see raised beds or any plant growth on our parkways except for village-approved trees. I think allowing raised beds would be the start of a very slippery slope of distasteful plantings and wood construction. Raised beds only in backyards. Thank you. The second comment, it reads, hello, my family resides on Cherry Street within a block of the resident who installed the Parkway planter. I wish to voice our opinion that we do not support the continued presence of the planters. The planters are unsightly and disruptive of the harmonized aesthetic of the street, but more importantly, violate an established village ordinance, which was enacted to protect public right-of-ways for public use. While we support the residents' environmental and altruistic motives, they do not support an exemption around existing regulation, particularly where the resident has available space in his private yard to erect the garden. My family, for example, has a garden in our backyard where we grow vegetables, we desire. Had the resident inquired with us prior to commencing his plans, we would have advised him of this and that we do not support the Parkway intrusion. Thank you for your consideration, Cherry Street residents. And the final comment, hello, I'm submitting a comment in regard to the Parkway Garden on Cherry Street. We reside on the same block of Cherry Street and are in favor of removing the garden. It has been discussed among the neighbors and we are in agreement that it is an unattractive structure on the block. Winnebago's parkways are all similar with grass and trees, and the garden structure does not meet the Winnebago code and is distasteful. I personally feel it makes the block look cheap. The resident has space on his property to put this garden elsewhere, and it does not need to be in the Parkway area. Furthermore, the resident wrote on the community app next door to voice his concerns and did not share the full story about his garden. He did not get neighbor approval for this, and people do not stop and enjoy the garden. It's an eyesore. On behalf of neighbors on Cherry Street, we would like to see it removed. That concludes the public comment, President Rentz.
Chris, you're muted. Still muted.
Usually pressing my space bar will allow me to speak without having to come off mute, but didn't work that time. I want to point out that the last two emails were unsigned. So we really don't know who they came from. And that's part of the problem with Zoom is you can't talk to people face to face and find out who's really concerned about these things. But duly noted. Now, I think like 15 minutes ago, I asked Steve to bring back up those three items so we could kind of close the loop on this and move it forward. Andy, I have to admit, I wasn't following everything that you were trying to lay out there.
Yeah.
Relative to the 120440.
My suggestion was mainly, we don't have to figure that one out tonight. If we go with number 3, where we get the EFC engaged, what I would suggest is that when they come back with their recommendations, consider whether it would be helpful to make modifications to that 12.20.10 section at that time to kind of harmonize it with whatever recommendations they have. Because, I do want to see some changes to that. Right now, it's sort of just prohibitive. It doesn't expand on what we would like to encourage other than grass, right? And I think we do want to encourage things. So my suggestion would be we, deal with that as part of item number 3. And just after.
You guys okay with that?
Well, I guess the question is, again, where does this overlap with, the planting? Is this where plantings go, or is it on 28? It's a little confusing in terms of how the two particular sections fit together. I agree. I'm sorry.
They need to cross-reference each other.
Right, exactly. I agree. And Andy, I totally agree with you in terms of providing positive direction as well. I think in hearing the residents' input, it strikes me that I think it helps to clarify that our job as a council is to kind of provide the legal framework for further discussion. So it's our job to kind of provide the legal foundation of what we don't want to have happen. And then we're going to involve the EFC to provide direction about what we do want to have happen within that framework. So this isn't the conversation we're having tonight is not necessarily the final format, because we do want to be more positive, but you got to start somewhere. And that legal foundation is important. I would love to add, Andy, your 5 points in terms of the factors, getting back to our conversation earlier, is I would really like to add in a sixth factor, which would be biker and pedestrian access and safety. Because as we're thinking about the Parkway, again, as I said earlier, I've certainly had plenty of experience in my 35 years here in terms of both getting babies and small children out on the Parkway side, as well as an elderly parent who has a very difficult time moving around. So while we do want to look to using that Parkway property in a really positive way, we want to make sure that we also provide for safe pedestrian access, because that's really what the purpose of it is to start with. So I think that needs to be, actually, maybe it ought to be one, but it needs to be a strong consideration in terms of how we guide how the public thinks about using that space going forward.
Great. I'm sure Jim is keeping very good notes in the background here, and we'll make sure that all these items get batted around at EFC, so we get some good recommendations out of them. And Ben, you're keeping track on the legal stuff, right? Okay, good. Anybody else with thoughts on 1204? I'm fine kicking it over to EFC and having them bring it back. Then we can do a comprehensive singular modification once we have all the stuff in front of us. Does that make sense? Yeah, what do you got there, John?
Yeah, I agree with the things we just talked about, but something that came to mind as we're going through this whole permit process, is there anything in the language for the permit that when you apply for a permit to plant in a right of way, it's clear it's not your property, but does that permit only apply to what is physically an extension of your property lines to the street? Or can I apply for a permit a block away in front of someone's house? As silly as it sounds.
No, that's a good
But
question.
that's the first thing I thought about when the garden came up. If it's a right of way, heck, I'll plant one somewhere else. So as long as you're going through this, let's clarify that it should be the straight extension of your property line to the street that is considered this planting zone, if that's what you call it. Or am I just totally off?
John,
Oh, that's a really good point.
depending on how this question is answered, John, you and Rosemary may be getting a visit from me.
Right. I mean, the clear thing on the discussion tonight is everyone has to understand it is not their property. So to go plant something in the property, in the right of way, I think if you're going to get a permit for it, you should be able to get a permit for it only in front of your house or in the back in your alley by your house. I don't think there's anything in there that says I can go in the right of way and plant a block away.
That
I'm
would.
not sure why I would want to do that, but I think that might want to be clarified.
That would be under Public Works Director discretion, not permitted.
I'd like to plant some buckthorn in front of John's house.
Yeah, if
Crazy
somebody's
stuff
planting,
comes up, right?
yeah. So if somebody's planting in conjunction with a neighbor and they want to do something together on two properties that are next to each other, we work with folks on things like that. But if somebody came in with sort of an absurd thing that they wanted to plant something down the corner, down the street and around the corner, do you have permission from the property owner that you're putting this in front of? No. Okay, the answer is no. That's the way we'd handle it.
Well, but it's not even that property owner's property in front of the property. So,
Right.
All right. I just thought I'd bring it up.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
Good point. As long as we're rewriting it, we might as well get it cleaned up and working to everybody's
Yeah.
satisfaction. So it sounds like
in front of Duke Childs in a right of way and plant something. It could be as simple as a dedication tree to a family member.
Right.
I mean,
Then you'd have to talk with the park district.
no, it's the village right of way.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
so it sounds like what we're doing is remanding this to a committee for some further study and some feedback, and then we'll probably end up bringing it back once they get their head wrapped around it, probably in February or March, I would imagine. And then we can take care of the legal stuff and if there's any other policy tweaks we want to make, I think we can deal with them at that point. Make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Excuse me, President Rentz. I have a
Yes.
procedural question for our village attorney. Kelly Conway has used Zoom to raise her hand, but the public comment has concluded. So procedurally, what's the protocol in
It's a
this?
study session, Kristen. We can do whatever we want.
Okay.
Let her in. Let her in.
So,
Yes,
sorry,
I'm
I'm
working on
here.
it. Thank you. Hi, Kelly.
Hi, I was just going to add in just a quick question to the last topic of the property rights that aren't actually your property. Isn't there already maybe some language about that regarding like what you're in charge of mowing or taking care of the grass? Wouldn't it be the kind of the same scenario? I'm just wondering if that could somehow be worked into the same process with what we're already responsible for mowing and keeping.
Yeah.
That was just-
There's language in there about the adjacent property owner having the duty to maintain, so you could probably use something like that.
Oh, wait, it just seemed like the same thing that we were talking about since they're
Yeah.
already,
Yeah, some kind of connection would be nice, I think.
thank you.
Great. Thanks,
Thanks.
Kelly. All right. Well, with that said, I think we can move forward to item number 4, which is the Sales Tax Rebate Economic Relief Program Review and Restaurant Relief Grant Proposal. Economic Development Coordinator Liz DeChamp, Assistant Village Manager Kristen Kazinas will present a review of the Sales Tax Rebate Program, final results, and hi Liz, and hold on here, and discuss a proposal for supplemental restaurant relief grants. Liz will begin with a brief PowerPoint presentation. Take it away, Liz.
Thanks, President Rentz. I heard that loud and clear. No, thank you. I appreciate it. Being here, and good evening to the rest of the council. I'm Liz DeChamp, the Economic Development Coordinator for the Village. Tonight, Kristen and I are going to talk about the local sales tax rebate program and a new program, the Restaurant Relief Grant. So first, I am very happy to report that the local sales tax rebate program was a huge success. The program closed last week on December 1st after being open for 12 weeks. The village distributed, the purpose of the program was to provide financial assistance to Winnetka local businesses who suffered during the COVID-19 pandemic. And the purpose of the grant was to provide immediate short-term operational needs. Next slide. The program closed on December 1st. We distributed, as you can see, $297,500 to 76 businesses, which means that through the program, about 1/3 of businesses in the entire village receive financial support, which is an incredible amount. This has been a very successful economic development program and business retention program, and one of the few on the North Shore that offer one like this. So of these businesses that are here, you can see the 76, there were 95 that were eligible, and it was all based on a tier system, right? So just as a reminder about the program, the council determined that it would use a portion of the municipal sales taxes from 2019 and reimburse it to eligible businesses based on this tier system of revenue that was brought in, revenue that they paid municipal sales taxes on. So if a business was eligible for the program, they had to be located in Winnetka, they had to have a brick and mortar store, they stayed within the revenue guidelines, and they were still open by the time the check was processed. And the village budgeted $375,000 to those 95. And next slide. Just want to make sure that we're on.
So thank you.
All right. But wait,
Liz.
hold on. I'm sorry. I have a little bit more. Sorry. I sort of lost track of which slide that was. So just want to give an overview, quick overview to let you know that through experience and data, that economic development and small business support programs are successful when there's active program management and engagement with businesses. So as my role as the ombudsman of the community program and to the business community, we did a lot of outreach to every business. We contacted every single one of those 76 businesses that got those dollars. So that was through email, the village's e-development, Winnetka newsletters, the website, phone calls, in-person visits when allowable, So anyone who is eligible and wanted to apply, we did. We also asked for and received help from the Winnetka Northfield Chamber of Commerce, the executive director, Terry Dason, who worked with us very closely and very hard to secure business applicants, whether they were chamber members or not. And they also promoted the program on their website and e-newsletter. And just sort of to tell you some stories, it's one thing to look at numbers, but the program made a big impact on our businesses. And we heard over and over again from family members, from business owners, how grateful they were. So for some, they used the dollars to get through the fall. Fred's Garage purchased their outdoor patio enclosures to extend their outdoor dining season with their reimbursement. And for some, it was really a lifeline. The North Shore Shoe Clinic at the corner of Tower and Green Bay in Hubbard Woods was very grateful. They have been going month to month, waiting for the winter for when people need their boots resoled, and this program literally helped keep the doors open.
Oh.
So in an era when small locally owned businesses are being considered an endangered species in some communities, I'm really proud that Winnetka has made every effort to support our local businesses and make them a priority. And just sort of high level, we shared our program information with economic development professionals in suburban Cook and Lake counties, and we're seeing it replicated in assistance programs throughout the area. So Winnetka is being looked to as a model for economic development. So now to Kristen. Kristen's going to talk about a new opportunity that the staff would like to present to council to support Winnetka restaurants who are continuing to be at the forefront of the COVID-19 pandemic, the mitigations, and who continue to struggle.
Thank you, Liz. So the next phase of the relief, we are targeting towards restaurants, providing financial assistance because restaurants have suffered economic loss specifically related to the new Tier 3 state mitigations, which has restricted and prohibited indoor dining. Our concept is that $4,000 per qualifying restaurant would be issued in a grant, no application required. The funding would come from two primary sources. $77,500 would be the remaining balance from the sales tax rebate economic relief program, plus an additional $22,500 from the economic development operating budget capacity, total funding of $100,000. There are 25 local restaurants that we've identified following some of the provisions from the first round program in that no chains would be allowed, but new restaurants that opened in 2020 would now qualify under this program. So in the next slide, I'll identify the 25 eligible restaurants that would meet the criteria of the program. And 4 restaurants on this slide were ones that were not eligible for the first round because they opened in 2020. 501 Local, Guanajuato, La Taquiza, and Town and Oak. So the benefits of this program is it would provide immediate financial relief to restaurants who have experienced the most significant negative impact of the Tier 3 mitigations. While retail has had capacity restrictions put on them, they still have allowed to remain open. Restaurants are restricted just to carry out and delivery right now. The process would be very streamlined, no application required, minimal staff time, no forms to process or review. And this would be a very innovative approach. As Liz mentioned, we've done research and been in collaboration and contact with many of our peers in economic development. And while there have been some supplementary restaurant targeted relief programs, they all require an application process. Next steps would be the council could consider approval of this proposal for ordinance for introduction and potential adoption at the 12/15 council meeting. Checks for the program would be included for consideration in in the 1215 warrant list, with grant assistance being received by the restaurants by the end of the year. And we do foresee hand delivering the checks to get the relief in the hands of the restaurants as soon as possible. At this time, Liz and I would be happy to entertain any questions from council.
Fire away, everybody. Go ahead, Rob.
Thank you for the report, guys. It's good to see this type of feedback and how many people were able to use it. I think that's fantastic. It accomplished what we wanted to do, which is to show our support, both from a support standpoint from our that we're behind them, but from a financial standpoint, which is what they really needed. I just have a couple questions on kind of following up what we talked about before, which is we can't give them everything they need. We just don't have enough money. Well, I think I support this, but I guess we talked about how many of these businesses, and I know we don't probably know, but anecdotally are filing for, there's gonna be more federal assistance coming, hopefully in a week or two. It's almost, I think there's more out of it if we can actually help them, the ones that don't know how to apply or are kind of too small to understand how to move this thing through, and hopefully they all do, but how do we assist them get federal aid so they can, so they aren't just reliant on what we're doing to succeed?
Great question, Trustee Apatow. I'm going to turn that one over to Liz, who did a lot to assist businesses. So Liz, do you want to talk a little bit about what you did to assist businesses with applying for grant opportunities?
Sure. So the large one in the state of Illinois is through the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. It's the Business Interruption Grant, and it's open to restaurants. It's open to any business that can say that they have suffered during the pandemic. And we have had some businesses receive those grants. And just yesterday, I was able to connect more businesses to that. So, you know, Maggie Skincare is someone who received the reimbursement and is looking for additional support, as well as Girlfriend Salon. She didn't pay sales taxes, but she's also looking for support. Shelly Cohen from Scissors Edge is, she's been around for decades in Winnetka. She was able to get the support through the reimbursement, and she was also looking for additional support. So I put her in contact with Terry Dason, who literally sat down and did the application with her. Terry had done the application. So we are offering some real technical assistance, and that's definitely something that we want to encourage as well. So we're looking for support for restaurants, we think is really important, because they are the few who are not able to operate as their business plan says. So even though there are fewer people allowed in retail, for example, they are still able to have those folks in.
Do we know the magnitude of the support that they're getting from the feds? Or from the state? I don't know if I thought there's a federal.
No, we do not. I know that we've done some digging in the past about which businesses have received the PPP grants and EIDL, and the data is not organized, and the data are not organized, I should say. And it's very hard to determine who's there. A lot of it becomes anecdotal. And there is a list of businesses that received the state grants, and I know that there are 2 salons and a restaurant that receive state grants. So that's something that we'd like to do going forward for the businesses who either weren't eligible for the reimbursement program and are not being, necessarily in line for the village restaurant support. Having a comprehensive support program in place for finance is something that we've worked, really hard to make sure that they do have those resources.
No, I think that's great, but it really, I think what we're doing is great, but I think the magnitude, or at least from the people that I know that have received these types of grants, is magnitudes more than we're giving, are able to do as a village. And I would like to make sure that part is exhausted before we go ahead and so we're at least educated on what type of support they can receive. And if they're not applying for it, that's a problem. In my mind, they should be all applying for it if they can. as they accept money from us as well.
And Trustee Apatow, that's a good point. And we do have for businesses a specific resource, COVID resource page on our website, which contains a lot of links. It's a landing page for these available grant opportunities. And additionally, Liz has done a great job on a weekly basis with e-development. Once COVID started, we moved from a monthly email to businesses to a weekly because there was so much happening so dynamically. And in those weekly emails, she has announced new opportunities as they've become available and included the links and resources. So we are trying to make sure that the businesses are aware of these federal, state, and even private grant opportunities.
So that's great. I hope they're all, you know, I want to support them all, but I hope they're all taking advantage of that, because that can really give them the lifeline they need versus what we're able to do. Thanks. I appreciate all you're working hard. I know.
Rob, those are great points. I'd say this, David and Liz and I were on the chamber call this morning, and I'd echo what Liz said, is that there was a real appreciation for the sales tax rebate program. And we hear, you know, periodically that the council and the village doesn't support retail and merchants in town. And I feel like this, you know, we've done a lot. We've done streetscape. We're doing what we can here on the rebate program. And I know you're right, Rob, it's not going to keep a business alive through a tough 4 or 5 months necessarily if they're on the edge to begin with.
Yeah.
But it fits within our budget. I think it's innovative. It's a little bit more, it doesn't preclude us for doing something more in 2021 if we can. And so, you know, it's what we can do at the moment. And I think the gesture is just that. And I think you're right. If we can encourage them to take advantage of more resources out there, that'd be fantastic. But this one, when I saw it come through, Liz and Kristen, I thought it was terrific because we talked about it. Andy, you brought it up. Can we do more at the last meeting? And this is sort of a first step to do more for those. Right. I mean, we know the restaurants are, you know, in a very difficult position here. So to me, this is a no-brainer in addition, Rob, to what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So thank you, Liz, for floating this, and Kristen, I think it's a great idea.
Thanks, Trustee Dearborn.
John.
Okay, great. Great so far tonight. The last sales tax rebate, is that money taxable that we gave them back?
Tax the rebate.
So
Do we
we
know that
are
or
not tax advisors. So we did notify the businesses that they would be required to provide their tax information, their W-9. And so we do have that information, but it's left up to their own tax advisor to determine that. I know we did word it in such a way so that it could be construed as not taxable. I remember Trustee Kripe, we worked through that in the ordinance. So we did the best that we could to support that initiative, but we can't make that determination for the business. That has to be left up to them and their tax advisor.
Yep, and I do remember that language being added to the last one. The reason why I asked the question is this one, we're calling this one a grant. Is it going to be the same basic thing? Is it set up differently that it is actually a grant? And is it going to be the same tax language, or do we know that better on this in this round?
So when we're working on drafting the ordinance, we would definitely want to include the same language to allow that opportunity to be approached in conjunction with their tax advisor.
Yeah, because it'd be great to give them the money that they can use all of it and not have to worry about paying tax again.
Does it know if the federal money is taxed? I don't think it is.
So that was so it's all income. So it all has to be reported. The question is whether it's taxable income.
Right.
And the potential issue is there is an exemption for certain kinds of relief provided pursuant to a declared disaster. And so the language that I provided before referenced the declaration. So we just want to make sure that's in here. whether we call it a grant or rebate or whatever isn't going to be the big deal to the IRS. It's more the related relief for that disaster. You know, there's not clear guidance from the IRS on it, and certainly not from the Illinois Department of Revenue. And in my experience, the Department of Illinois will just kind of adopt whatever approach the feds come up with. Maybe in the next relief package that's being talked about, there'll be some clear tax. There's a whole bunch of tax issues flowing out of all this relief that's been going around, and a lot of the state income tax issues that's going to need to be addressed at some point in the next 6 months, or hopefully before April. It's a big unknown. You know, we've done our best though.
And Trustee
think
Craig
that's all
makes
I
a
have.
good point, because President Rintz did sign the new emergency declaration at the last council meeting. So that important provision of spurring the taxability implications has been reenacted.
Yeah. The governor's disaster, though, will be statewide and certainly incorporate us as well.
Any?
John, did you have another question, or was that it?
Nope, I'm good, thank you.
Okay. I think I can guess at the logic behind why you're just doing a 4,000 flat grant to all the restaurants. But, you know, the last program we had was tiered. If you can just walk through how you arrived at this decision.
Great question, Trustee Lampier. Yes, we did recognize that this was a bit of a different approach than the tiered approach that we did initially. And I think from staff's perspective, there's an important distinction. In the original program, we tied the tiers to the 2019 taxable sales. So we labeled it a rebate program. And for that reason, the tiered approach made sense, because we were envisioning rebating a portion of the sales taxes that were generated and received by the village. This new approach is a bit of a different lens. It's a true grant. It's not based on a rebate of the sales tax generated. It's available funding left from the initial program, yes, but it is not tied to the 2019 taxable sales. It's a true grant. That allowed us to do some positive things, such as include the 4 new restaurants that opened in 2020. And because of the grant approach, the straight line approach seemed to make more sense.
Okay, thank you. I don't know, you know, what the difference in the sales of the restaurants, if it's, you know, considerable, and if there would be any concern or feeling like it's not fair. But I understand the logic. And so that was just why I brought it up. Thanks.
Thank you.
And to that point, Trustee Lampier, we did research into what other communities are doing for grants specifically. And some were taking the tiered approach like we took for the reimbursement, but many, the majority were doing flat grants, and just about this same amount, $4,000 or $5,000 from across the region, from across the country. We looked in different areas, and overall, this is what we were finding.
Oh, interesting. Good. Okay. Great. Well, it sure makes it a lot easier to administer. So that's good too.
Other thoughts?
I think it's a great program. If nothing else, I think the next 3 to 6 months are a huge opportunity for Winnetka. As restaurants are looking at towns to open in, I think this is a differentiator, not only that we're willing to do it, but that we're able to do it. You know, Winnetka, sometimes it can be like having a difficult significant other, you know, where like it's hard to, you know, connect with them at first, but it's worth it. Okay. Maybe that's like Winnetka. You know, when business commits to Winnetka, we commit to our local businesses, and hopefully that won't be lost in all of this. As far as the amount, I think the amount is great. You know, I do work with some restaurant clients, and every penny matters right now. Every penny is somebody's job. Every penny is somebody's ability to make it another week. We're looking at a cliff on this aid. The federal unemployment aid ends at the end of the month. A lot of other aid ends at the end of the month. The PPP stuff was really only calculated to ever provide relief through like July. So we're, the federal government is, long past due in getting things moving. So I think anything we do is great. I think this is just a great program. I especially like the way it's being executed in a very personal way. Liz, good job, and Kristen and everybody, reaching out and just, doing whatever we can to make it easier, because God knows they've got enough stress right now and we don't want to add to it. So thank you.
We're government and we're here to help you. Good job, Liz.
Thanks.
Other comments, questions? Are we okay with this? Can they move it to ordinance?
Yeah, this
Go
is a
ahead.
really nice, I so appreciate
Jack?
the way you set it up and all of the outreach. I mean, Liz, really, I think it just it's been terrific in terms of the amount of communication. So thank you, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
I agree with you, Penny. That really makes a difference. It's great to do this, but it has to really be communicated well and be on the front line every day. And that's really important to how this is seen by the retailers and the support they're getting. So good job. Really nice.
Good. Thank you.
Yep. So that's great, guys. We two good items. And I just wanted to mention too that, Andy, I want to thank you because, you really were the driver on both of these items tonight. I really appreciate you taking the lead on reaching out to our neighbor and engaging them directly, which I think is our style as a council, to talk to people rather than just making rules and shoving them down through staff, that we actually go out and talk to people when there's issues and try to find resolution. So thank you so much for that, really. And I think we've raised an important issue and we're able to move it forward, and ditto with this thing. It's nice that we have a little extra cash left over, and the fact that you noticed that we did and suggested that we try to plow it back into something else is really worthwhile. I've got several restaurants as tenants, and I have to tell you, they are really hurting. And, it's good to think about the tax implications, I guess, but at this point, they're not thinking about tax. They're just thinking about keeping the doors open and regretfully making their state tax payments on liquor sales and things like this, which don't seem to be abated during this period of time, which is really regretful that, the state can't back off on their collection activities even in a time like this. And I've heard that from all the restaurants that I've been working with, that the state has been very, very, very difficult in buying time so they can make their payments and stay current. So, but anyway, thanks, Andy. I appreciate that.
Hey, Chris.
Yeah.
I would like to say that what Andy just said should become our tagline, Liz. When businesses commit to Winnetka, we commit to our businesses. That's a really good line. So I hope you use that and quote him on it.
And lastly, I know this is kind of late and lame, and I will certainly mention this at the next meeting as well. But since it was just last night, last night the Landmarks Preservation Commission met, and Louise Holland served her final meeting as chair of that group. She has been serving this community continuously for 34 years, which is just mind-boggling to me. She told me that she served under Gwen Trindle as a zoning board under her first assignment back in the early 80s. Just a phenomenal body of work for our community. And, certainly I think, Rob and Kristen, we should do something special and some sort of proclamation to recognize all of her hard work and really make an effort to thank her for all the work she's done. I mean, she's been chairing that LPC for 15 years. I don't think anybody had the guts to throw her off. So, and she knew it too. And thank goodness she stuck around, because she raised the temperature when it needed to be. And she always had those difficult conversations when not a lot of people were willing to. So, but I would like to do something, maybe before year's end, if we can. I know that's only one more meeting, but if we can't get it in, certainly by the first of the year, it would be a good thing.
We need to have a Louise Holland Day,
Yeah, no,
definitely. Yeah.
Chris, right on that. And she went out with a bang on that meeting last night. And I think that hopefully Jack will weigh in a little bit on that meeting because it was a big one. And it was classic Louise handling that meeting. So she's the best.
Yep, yep.
She will.
So you'll have a thorough report next Tuesday, right, Jack?
Sure, absolutely.
I hope so.
I hope so too.
Yep.
It was.
All right, gang. Well, that does it for our business tonight. So without anything else, I just like to ask that somebody make a motion.
Immersion. I make the motion that we adjourn.
Second.
I'll make a motion that we adjourn.
Trustee Lampier,
Yes.
trustee Dearborn,
Yes.
trustee Apatow,
Yes.
trustee Swerk,
Yes.
trustee Caladarchi,
Yes.
trustee Kreip.
Yes.
That motion carries and we stand adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Good work tonight.
Thank